Oh boy. Okay, we got another video here talking about the 10 game mark standings. If the NHL season finished at the 10 game mark, who would be in the playoffs? And do the first 10 games have any indication as to who makes the playoffs in April? I'll touch on all of these things coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Now in today's video, this has been a video I've been waiting to do since the start of the season. We're looking at the 10 game mark standings. Now, I've been doing these over the past couple of years. I've got all of the stats from the last 5 and 10 years, basically doing all the teams at the 10 game mark, putting them in the standings, seeing how many teams who started in the playoff spot at the 10 game mark wound up making the playoffs. 7+ win teams, does that indicate for sure making the playoffs? And does starting the season with a below 500 record at the 10 game mark indicate a death sentence? We'll touch on all of these things here. So we'll start with the actual standings as it sits right now. Now, all teams in the NHL have hit the 10 game mark except for one team, that is the Anaheim Ducks, but I'm basically able to go off of it even though the Ducks do play later tonight against the Detroit Red Wings. So even though the Ducks have been the only team who has yet to hit the 10 game mark, I should be able to do all of the things that I need to do here regarding the 10 game mark standings without the Ducks hitting the 10 game mark. So here's how the standings look like as of the 10 game mark. So in the Eastern Conference, the New Jersey Devils would lead the Eastern Conference with an 8-2-0 record in the Metro Division. The other teams in the Metro Division would be the 15-point Penguins, 14-point Canes, 13-point Flyers, 12-point Caps, 12-point Jackets, 9-point Islanders, and 8-point Rangers. In the Atlantic, the 7-3-0 Canadiens would lead the Atlantic Division with 14 points, followed by 14-point Detroit, 11-point Ottawa, 11-point Toronto, 10-point Florida, 10-point Buffalo, 10-point Tampa, and 8-point Boston. In the West, in the Central Division, the Utah Mammoth would lead the entire Western Conference with 16 points, followed by Winnipeg, who would have 14, Colorado, who would have 14, Dallas would have 13, Chicago, who would have 12, Nashville, who would have 10, Minnesota, who would have 8, and St. Louis, who would have 7. And then in the Pacific Division, Vegas would lead with 15 points, followed by Seattle with 13, Anaheim with either 11, 12, or 13, depending on how later today's game go, LA with 11, Edmonton with 10, Vancouver with 10, San Jose with 6, and Calgary with 5. Now, if you look back at previous years, if you look at the last 5 seasons, that's from the 2020-2021 season to last year's 24-25 season, teams who have hit 7+ wins at the 10 game mark, there have been 35 teams over the past 5 years who have hit 7+ wins at the 10 game mark. 31 of those teams wound up making the playoffs. Only a handful of them, only 4, including last year's Rangers, missed the playoffs after starting out with 7 wins in their first 10 games. So it's not a guarantee lock that you make the playoffs, but it's a very good indication that most teams who hit 7+ wins at the 10 game mark make the playoffs. Even if you go back further, go back 10 years, so from the 14-15 season to the 24-25 season, excluding the COVID postponed season, there have been 63 teams who've had 7+ wins at the 10 game mark. Of those 63 teams, 57 eventually made the playoffs. So only 6 teams out of the last 10 years who started with 7+ wins wound up missing the playoffs. So it's a very, very likely stat that if you have 7+ wins at the 10 game mark, you're almost guaranteed to make the playoffs. As in the last 5 years, it's an 88.6% chance of making the playoffs. The last 10 years, a 90.5% chance. So you have around a 90% chance of making the playoffs if you have a 7+ wins at the 10 game mark. And this year, there were 7 teams who hit the 7+ wins at the 10 game mark. That's the Jets, who had 7 wins, the Mammoths, who had 8 wins, the Devils, who had 8 wins, the Penguins, who had 7 wins, the Canes, who had 7 wins, the Canadiens, who had 7 wins, and the Red Wings, who had 7 wins. So those 7 teams have all had 7+ wins at the 10 game mark. So there's an indication that probably 5 or 6 of those teams who have hit the 7+ win mark will make the playoffs. And given the fact that a couple of those are Utah, Detroit, and Pittsburgh, having only 1 or 2 of those guys wound up missing the playoffs at the end of the season is a little bit surprising. Having at least 2 of Utah, Detroit, or Pittsburgh make the playoffs would be insane. So very interesting note there. But if you have 7+ wins at the 10 game mark, almost almost a guarantee to make the playoffs, and there's 7 teams this year who have hit the 7+ wins at the 10-game mark. Now, if you look at the below 500 averages, it's not great to make the playoffs after starting below 500. So if you have a below 500 record in the past 5 years, there have been 47 teams who have started the season with a below 500 record at the 10-game mark. Of those 47 teams, 8 made the playoffs. If you go back 10 years, there have been 89 teams who have started the season below 500 at the 10-game mark. 17 of those teams wound up making the playoffs. So very, very low percent, like it's about 20%. You can see maybe one team who's under 10 points at the 10-game mark eventually wound up making the playoffs. Maybe one team, but it's not great odds, and it gets worse if you have 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark. So if you have 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark over the past 5 seasons, 33 teams over the past 5 years had 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark. 2 made the playoffs. And if you go back even further, 61 teams have had 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark in the past 10 years, excluding the COVID postponed season. 4 made the playoffs. It is almost a guaranteed death sentence for any team who finishes 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark. Almost a death sentence. And so far this year, there have been 6 teams who've had a below 500 record, 5 teams who've had 8 points or lower. So the New York Islanders are the only team who's had a sub 500 record who's not 8 points or lower, as they've hit the 9-point plateau, while Minnesota, who has 8, St. Louis, who has 7, San Jose, who has 6, Calgary, who has 5, the Rangers, who have 8, and the Bruins, who have 8, have all hit 8 points or lower. So maybe one team can make the playoffs who started the season 8 points or lower, but you're going to have at least a couple of St. Louis, Minnesota, San Jose, Calgary, New York, or Boston, most likely NYI too, miss the playoffs based on these stats. So very interesting note there. Maybe one of them sneaks in and is able to overcome their slow starts, but it's almost a death sentence if you hit 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark, and those 6 teams do have 8 points or lower. Now, if you're in a playoff spot at the 10-game mark, you have a pretty good chance of making the playoffs. Over the past 5 years, of the teams who have been in a playoff spot, which is a combined 80 teams, 57 wound up making the playoffs. And over the past 10 years, over the 160 teams who were in a playoff spot at the 10-game mark, 112 wound up making the playoffs. So you're about a 70% chance of making the playoffs if you're in a playoff spot at the 10-game mark. So over the past 10 years, it rounds out to an average of about 11 teams who are in a playoff spot round up making the playoffs at the end of the season. So you'll usually have 4 or 5 teams who are in a playoff spot at the 10-game mark fall out of a playoff spot, and 4 or 5 teams who are out of a playoff spot go in. But still, you take away 4 teams. Let's say 12 of the current teams who are in a playoff spot right now will wind up making the playoffs by the end of the season. The current teams who are in a playoff spot as it sits right now would be Vegas, Seattle, Anaheim, top 3 teams in the Pacific, Utah, Winnipeg, Colorado, top 3 teams in the Central, with Dallas and Chicago as the 2 wildcard teams. And in the Eastern Conference, you'd have New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Carolina, the top 3 teams in the Metro, Montreal, Detroit, Ottawa, the top 3 teams in the Atlantic, and you'd have Philadelphia and Washington, the 2 wildcard teams. Like, this is literally insane. Like, let's say you get 2 teams out of each conference. That means at least one of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Detroit make the playoffs this year, and that means at least 2 of Chicago, Utah, Seattle, or Anaheim make the playoffs this year. Like, that would be insane. And teams who are currently out of a playoff spot is Edmonton, but they've had experience over the past couple of years being out of a playoff spot at the 10-game mark and going back in. LA's another one, Minnesota's another one, St. Louis, Vancouver, a little bit of a surprise there. In the Eastern Conference, Toronto's out, Florida's out, Tampa's out, Boston's out, Columbus, NYR. Like, there are going to be teams this year who missed the playoffs who deserve to be in the playoffs. Like, that's just how competitive this year the NHL is. But still, it's very interesting out there. You're probably going to have around 11, 12 teams who are currently in the playoff spot right now at the 10-game mark wind up making the playoffs. So that's going to allow some surprising teams to make the playoffs this year. And you're probably going to have a couple of teams surprisingly miss. So definitely don't forget to keep that in mind. We'll check back in April, see if these stats sort of reflect how the starts went and how the stats have been going over the past couple of years. But usually, if you look back at it over the past 5 years, over the past 10 years, if you have 7+ wins at the 10-game mark, you're almost guaranteed a playoff spot. It's not a 100% guarantee, but it's a very, very likely chance you're going to make the playoffs. If you're 8 points or lower at the 10-game mark, almost a death sentence. It's a little bit better if you're only below 500, but if you have 8 points or lower, almost a death sentence. And over the past 10 years, 5 years, usually around 11 to 12 teams who are in a playoff spot at the 10 game mark eventually do wind up making the playoffs. And once again, like I said, which means you could have a couple of Chicago, Utah, Seattle, Anaheim, Philly, Pittsburgh, Detroit make the playoffs, which I don't think very many people were expecting a whole bunch of those teams to be in a playoff spot at the 10 game mark. So very interesting note there. I left you guys thoughts. Do you think these stats are sort of meaningless? Do you think these actually have big implications? And I love your guys' thoughts. Do you think that a lot of these teams who are in a playoff spot right now will wind up making the playoffs in April? Definitely thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk for today. We're going to like this video. If you're listening, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this for all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link to that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.